This is a story about my family. It is a story I grew up with, told in pieces over dinner tables and on long car rides. It is the story of my father-in-law, Lee Ringet. But it is more than just one man's tale. It is a testament to the quiet courage of ordinary people who were thrust into the most extraordinary and terrible of circumstances. It speaks to the deep, unbreakable bonds of family. It reminds us that history is not just a collection of dates and epic battles. It is the sum of countless individual lives, each with its own hopes, fears, and heartbreaks. This story begins in a world on the brink of darkness, in a city of music and dreams that was about to become a place of nightmares. My father-in-law was not a soldier or a spy in the traditional sense. He was a brewer from Vienna, a young man who loved his family and his craft. Yet the currents of history pulled him from his home, across oceans, and into the hidden corners of a global conflict. He was asked to do things he never imagined, to face dangers that would test the very limits of his spirit. His journey is a powerful reminder that heroes are often found in the most unexpected places. They are the people who, when faced with an impossible choice, choose to act. They choose to resist, to survive, and to build a future out of the ashes of the past. Telling this story feels more important now than ever. In a world where memory can be short and the lessons of the past can fade, we must hold on to these personal histories. They are our connection to the human cost of war and intolerance. They are the threads that weave the grand tapestry of our shared experience. Through Lee's eyes, we see the fear of a family losing everything. We witness the bravery of a desperate escape. We feel the hope of a new beginning in a new land, and the enduring love that became the foundation for generations to come. This is a story of survival, but it is also a story of life. The journey you are about to read is one of profound loss, but also of incredible resilience. It is about how one family, the Ringets, navigated the storm of the 20th century. It is about how the ripples of war can travel through time, touching the lives of children and grandchildren in ways they are only just beginning to understand. Lee's story is a legacy. It is a gift of memory passed down, and it is our duty and our honor to share it. It is a quiet story, but its echo is powerful. It is the story of a life that mattered, a life that reminds us of the light that can persist even in the darkest of times. The dining room of the Ringet home in Vienna felt unnaturally quiet on that March evening in 1938. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn tight, as if to keep the city's growing fear from seeping through the glass. The scent of roasted chicken and potatoes, usually a source of comfort, now hung in the air with a sense of finality. Lee Ringet, a young man with kind eyes and the strong hands of a brewer, looked at his family around the polished wooden table. His father, Moritz, sat at the head, his face etched with a worry that had aged him years in just a few short weeks. His mother, Anna, moved about the room, her hands trembling slightly as she refilled water glasses, her movements a frantic ballet of denial. "You must eat, Leopold," Anna said, her voice thin. "You will need your strength for the journey." Lee, known to all as Leopold then, picked at his food. The journey. It was a word they spoke in whispers, a word that meant leaving behind everything they had ever known. Outside, the sounds of marching boots and jubilant chilling cheers for the Anschluss, the annexation of Austria by Nazi Germany, were a constant terrifying drumbeat. They were no longer safe in their own home, in their own city. They were Jews in a land that had suddenly, violently turned against them. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every distant shout a personal menace. Moritz cleared his throat, his voice low and firm, trying to project a calm he did not feel. "The arrangements are made. The train for Switzerland leaves at dawn. Your papers are in order, Leopold. They are for a brewing apprentice on a work exchange. It is a thin story, but it is the only one we have." He looked directly at his son, his eyes conveying a universe of love and fear. "You must not look back. You must not hesitate. You are our hope now. You carry our future with you." The weight of those words settled upon Lee's shoulders, heavier than any bag he would carry. He was not just saving himself, he was carrying the survival of his entire family. Lee nodded, unable to find the words to respond. He looked at his younger sister, huddled close to their mother, her eyes wide with a fear she was too young to fully comprehend. He wanted to promise her that everything would be all right, that they would be together again soon, laughing in this very room. But a promise was a luxury he could not afford. The truth was a cold, hard knot in his stomach. This was goodbye. This meal, this last supper in their beloved Vienna, was the end of their world. As his mother placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek, Lee knew he had to be strong. For them. The pre-dawn air was cold and damp as Lee slipped out of his family's apartment. The streets of Vienna, once alive with music and laughter, were now a maze of menacing shadows. Every corner held a potential danger, every passing car a possible threat. He wore a simple workman's coat and clutched a small, worn suitcase that contained his entire life. A change of clothes, a few family photographs, and the forged papers that were his only ticket to freedom. He walked quickly, his head down, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He forced himself not to look back at the window of his home, knowing the sight of his family watching would shatter the fragile courage he had pieced together. The train station, the Westbahnhof, was a chaotic swirl of motion and noise, but underneath it all was a palpable tension. Stern-faced soldiers in crisp, dark uniforms patrolled the platforms, their eyes scanning the crowds with cold suspicion. Their presence was a constant, terrifying reminder of the new order. Lee kept his gaze fixed on the ground, making himself as small and unnoticeable as possible. He could feel the stares of the guards, could hear the harsh, guttural commands barked at others who were being pulled from the lines. He saw a family being roughly separated, their cries swallowed by the hiss of steam from the locomotives. Fear, sharp and metallic, filled his mouth. As he approached the checkpoint, a guard with a sneer on his face blocked his path. "Papers," the man grunted, his voice devoid of any warmth. Lee's hand shook as he handed over the documents. The guard examined them slowly, his eyes flicking up to study Lee's face, then back down to the photograph. Each second stretched into an eternity. Lee could hear his own blood rushing in his ears. He recited the details of his cover story in his head, a mantra of survival, a brewing apprentice heading to Zurich for a temporary post. He tried to look calm, innocent, just a young man on his way to a new job, nothing more. Suddenly, the guard's eyes narrowed. "You look nervous, boy? What are you hiding?" he asked, his voice laced with suspicion. Just then, a commotion erupted further down the platform. A whistle blew shrilly, and guards began shouting and running toward the disturbance. The distraction was a gift from fate. The guard, annoyed but distracted, stamped the papers with a forceful thud and shoved them back at Lee. "Go!" he snarled. "Get out of my sight!" Lee didn't need to be told twice. He grabbed his suitcase and hurried onto the train, not daring to look back. As the train lurched forward, pulling slowly away from the station, away from Vienna, away from everything he had ever known, he finally allowed himself to breathe. The journey across the border was not the end of Lee's ordeal, but the beginning of a new, uncertain chapter. In Switzerland, he was a man without a country, a refugee with a temporary visa and a dwindling supply of money. The sense of relief was quickly replaced by a profound loneliness and the constant, gnawing worry for the family he had left behind. He found menial work at a small brewery, his days filled with the familiar smells of hops and barley, but his nights were haunted by nightmares of what might be happening back in Vienna. He sent letters, but received no replies. The silence was a heavy, suffocating blanket of fear. He was safe, but he was utterly alone. His salvation came in a most unexpected form. One evening, a man approached him in a quiet Zurich cafe. The man introduced himself as a British businessman, but his questions were not about beer. He knew Lee's name. He knew he was from Vienna. He knew he was a Jew who had escaped the Nazis. The man was an agent of the Allies recruiting individuals who had escaped the Reich, people with language skills and a deep personal motivation to fight back. He offered Lee a chance not just to survive, but to contribute. He offered him passage to America, a place of safety, in exchange for his help. The voyage across the Atlantic was a strange and dreamlike experience. The vast, empty ocean was a stark contrast to the crowded, fearful streets of Europe. For the first time in months, Lee felt a flicker of hope. He stood on the deck for hours, watching the waves, breathing in the salty air, and trying to imagine what this new life in America would hold. He was surrounded by other refugees, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and tentative optimism. They shared stories in hushed tones. tales of loss and escape that mirrored his own. They were all bound together by a shared past and an unknown future, sailing toward a promise of liberty. Arriving in New York Harbor was a moment Lee would never forget. The sight of the Statue of Liberty, majestic and welcoming, brought tears to his eyes. It was more than a statue. It was a symbol of everything he had lost and everything he hoped to find. It was a promise of a future free from fear. As the ship docked and he stepped onto the soil of a new continent, he was no longer just Leopold Rinke, the refugee from Vienna. He was Lee Rinke, an American in the making. He was a young man who had been rescued and who was now ready to do his part to help rescue others from the darkness that had consumed his homeland. America provided safety, but I just couldn't sit idly by while the world burned. True to my word, I made myself available to the Allied war effort. I wasn't trained as a soldier or a spy, but I did have something valuable. I was a native German speaker who could easily pass as a European. My quiet demeanor and unassuming appearance made me the perfect courier. The Office of Strategic Services, the forerunner to the CIA, saw my potential. They gave me a new identity, a crash course in tradecraft, and, a mission that honestly sounded like something from a motion picture. My task was to travel to Panama, a crossroads of the world teeming with spies from all sides. My mission was of the utmost importance. I was to deliver a handwritten letter to a man vacationing there, a man the world knew as Albert Einstein. The physicist had been working with the US government, and a secure, untraceable line of communication was needed. I was the perfect man for the job, so I traveled to Panama under the guise of a brewing consultant exploring new markets for tropical beers. I spent my days visiting local establishments, talking about fermentation and bottling, just playing my part to perfection. But honestly, my mind was always on the mission, on the small sealed envelope that I kept hidden at all times. The rendezvous was arranged to take place on a secluded beach. Dressed as a tourist, I walked along the shoreline, my heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and fear. I spotted an older man with a familiar shock of white hair sitting under a palm tree, looking out at the ocean. It was him. Approaching casually, I sat nearby. I spoke a pre-arranged code phrase in German, something about the quality of the local water for brewing. Einstein turned, his intelligent eyes studying me for a moment. He replied with the correct countersign. Without another word, I subtly passed him the envelope. The exchange took less than a minute. Einstein nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the risk I had taken. He offered a simple, quiet thank you in German, and honestly, those words carried a weight that went far beyond mere politeness. I simply nodded back and walked away, melting back into the scenery of the beach. I had done it. I, Lee Rinke, the brewer from Vienna, had just delivered a secret message to one of the most important minds in the world, playing a small but crucial role in the great struggle against the evil that had stolen my home. It was a moment of quiet, personal victory, a defiant act against the forces that had tried to erase me. I had fought back in my own way. After his mission in Panama, I settled into my new American life, though, honestly, the shadows of war and the worry for my family were never far from my thoughts. I found work at a brewery in New Jersey, and the familiar routines were a real source of comfort in a world that still felt pretty foreign. It was there, amidst the clatter of bottles and the scent of malt, that I met Tita. She was a fellow Jewish refugee, a bright and vibrant woman from Germany whose family had also managed to escape the horrors unfolding in Europe. She worked in the brewery's office, and her laughter was a light in the otherwise somber atmosphere of our shared experience. Our connection was immediate and deep. We understood each other's unspoken sorrows, the grief for the lives and families we had left behind. We didn't need to explain the sadness that sometimes clouded our eyes or the nightmares that woke us in the night. We found solace in one another's company, building a new world for ourselves one small moment at a time. We would take long walks, speaking a mixture of German and newly learned English, sharing stories of our childhoods in cities that now seemed a world away. In each other, we found a piece of home. I fell in love with Tita's strength and her unwavering optimism. She saw the good in the world, even after all the bad she had witnessed. She encouraged me to look forward, to build a future, not just to dwell on the past. One sunny afternoon in a small park, I asked Tita to be my wife. It was not a grand proposal, but a quiet, heartfelt promise to face whatever came next together. She accepted with tears in her eyes, tears not of sadness, but of profound joy. In a time of global chaos and personal loss, we had found the profound stability of love. Our wedding was a simple affair, attended by a small circle of friends, fellow refugees who had become our new family. It was a celebration not just of our union, but of survival and hope. We were two people who had been uprooted by hatred, who had lost almost everything, but who had found in each other the courage to start again. Our marriage was an act of defiance, a declaration that love and life would continue, that the darkness would not win. We were planting new roots in a new land, determined to build a family and a future filled with the light that had been so cruelly extinguished in our past. The end of World War II brought a collective sigh of relief. But for me, peace was complicated. I learned the devastating truth about my family. My parents and sister had not survived. They had perished in the camps, their lives extinguished by the hate I had so narrowly escaped. The news was a crushing weight, a grief so profound it threatened to consume me. Tita and I mourned together, holding on to each other as we faced the terrible finality of our losses. We focused on building our new family, welcoming a daughter, Linda. She was our future, a living symbol of hope and continuity in the face of annihilation. Just as a sense of normalcy began to settle over our lives, the world shifted again. The Allied victory gave way to a new, more subtle conflict, the Cold War. The lines were redrawn, and old allies became new adversaries. One day, a man in a plain suit came to the brewery. He was from a new agency, and he had my old file from the OSS. They knew about my past, my skills, my unwavering opposition to tyranny. They told me that my country needed me again. They spoke of a new threat, a new darkness spreading from the east, and they asked me to serve once more, in small, secret ways. The request tore me in two. I looked at my wife and my young daughter, the family that was my entire world. I had found peace, a life I had fought so hard to build. The thought of re-entering that world of secrets and danger filled me with dread. I had seen the cost of conflict up close, had felt its sting in the most personal way imaginable. I wanted nothing more than to be a husband, a father, a brewer. I wanted to leave the shadows behind for good and live a quiet, ordinary life. The past, it seemed, was not yet finished with me. Ultimately, my sense of duty won out. I believed that the freedoms I now enjoyed in America were precious and had to be defended. I agreed to help, on the condition that my missions would be few and that my family would never be put in danger. I became an occasional asset, using my business trips as a cover to pass information or make contact with other agents. It was a double life, a heavy burden to carry. I would return home to my smiling daughter and loving wife, the secret of my other life locked away, a silent reminder that the ripples of war could stretch for decades, long after the fighting had stopped. As the years passed, the Cold War thawed and my secret work faded into the past. I grew older, a grandfather now. My life centered entirely around the family I cherished. My daughter Linda had grown up knowing her father was a man of quiet strength and deep conviction, but she knew little of the specifics of my past. I rarely spoke of Vienna, of the war, or of the family I had lost. The stories were locked away, painful ghosts I preferred not to disturb. But Linda felt a growing urgency to understand, to know the man her father had been and the journey that had shaped him. She began to ask questions, gently at first. She sat with me for hours, a tape recorder on the table between us. At first, I was hesitant, the memories sharp and painful. But as I spoke, the stories began to flow. I told her about the Last Supper in Vienna, the fear at the train station, the secret mission to Panama. I spoke of my parents and sister, my voice thick with a grief that time had not erased. Linda listened, captivated and heartbroken. She was not just hearing history, she was receiving a legacy, a sacred trust. Recording my story became Linda's mission. She realized that my life was a testament to a history that was rapidly disappearing as my generation passed away. These were not stories found in textbooks. They were the human, personal accounts of ordinary people caught in extraordinary times. She felt a profound responsibility to preserve my voice, my memories, my truth. It was a way to honor me, and also to honor the family members she had never known, to ensure they were not forgotten. that their names were spoken and their memory kept alive for future generations. The tapes became a bridge between father and daughter, a new level of understanding and connection. Linda saw not just her quiet, gentle father, but the brave young man who had risked everything for a chance at life. In telling my story, I seemed to find a measure of peace, a release from the burdens I had carried in silence for so long. I was entrusting my past to my daughter, ensuring that the lessons of my life, of courage, resilience, and the enduring power of family would not be lost to time. It was a promise she made to me. My story would be told. My legacy would live on. Decades after I passed away, Linda Rinket finally traveled to Vienna. She walked the streets I had described, the city of my youth. It was a place of ghosts and echoes. She stood outside the apartment building where the Rinket family had shared their last meal, trying to imagine me as a young man, looking out from those very windows. The city was beautiful again, filled with music and life. But for Linda, it was layered with the history she now carried within her. She saw not just the grand architecture, but the invisible scars of a dark past. She visited the Westbahnhof train station. Standing on the busy platform, she closed her eyes and tried to picture the scene I had painted for her, the chaos, the soldiers, the fear. She imagined a brave, terrified young man clutching a small suitcase, making a desperate run for his life. In that moment, the history was not abstract. It was real. It was personal. It was the story of her own blood. She felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for my courage, for the split-second decision of a distracted guard that had allowed her own life and the lives of her children to exist. The trip was not about anger or reopening old wounds. It was about connection and remembrance. It was about closing a circle that had been left open for more than half a century. By walking in my footsteps, Linda was honoring my journey. She was bearing witness to both the life that was stolen and the life that was built in its place. She left Vienna with a deeper understanding of her own identity, of the long, complex chain of events that had led to her existence. My legacy was not just in the stories I told, but in the family I created, a family that had survived against all odds. In the end, my story is a quiet epic. It is a reminder that behind the grand narratives of war and history are millions of individual human hearts. It is a story of dignity in the face of degradation, of hope in the midst of despair. It is about the unbreakable bonds of family and the importance of memory. My legacy lives on in my children and grandchildren, in the stories they now tell. It is a legacy of courage, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and a solemn promise that we will never forget.